There is a building in County Clare that has been standing for 400 years. I know it because I worked in it 30 years, maintaining the grounds and the structure of old Anglo-Irish estates. Stone walls 2 feet thick, no central heating, no insulation in the way you would recognize it. And in January, in the middle of an Irish winter, that building was warmer inside than most of the houses I have walked into in this country. I used to think about that. Standing in the kitchen of one of those estates on a bitter morning, coat off, perfectly comfortable, and thinking about the heating bills my neighbors were paying for houses built 50 years ago. Modern houses. Houses with systems and units and technicians who come out twice a year. Colder. Every one of them colder. The people who built that estate in County Clare did not have a furnace. They had knowledge. They understood something about heat and stone and air and draft that the construction industry decided, somewhere around 60 years ago, you no longer needed to understand. Because by then, there was a product, and a bill, and a system that needed maintaining. I am Jacob, and today I am going to show you exactly what they knew. I want to start with the simplest one, because it is the one that will make the biggest difference for the least effort, and I think that is the right place to begin. Every old Irish cottage had what they called a door sausage, just a tube of fabric, stuffed with raw wool or whatever cloth was to hand, laid along the bottom of the door. That is the whole of it. A draft coming under a door is not a small thing. In a cold house, it pulls the warm air out and draws cold air in all night while you sleep. The cottage people knew this. They had known it for generations. The door sausage was not an invention. It was just common sense, made physical. I will not tell you this solves everything. It does not. What it does is stop one of the most consistent and wasteful heat losses in any older home. And you can make one this afternoon from a piece of fabric and whatever stuffing you have. If you want raw wool, which works best in my experience, you can find it online for very little. I paid, I want to say, about $20 for enough to do 3 doors. That is your drafts handled for the winter. The reason this works is the same reason it worked in 1890. Cold air is heavy. It moves low and fast along the floor. The sausage sits in its path. That is all it needs to do. Now I want to tell you about something I saw in nearly every old farmhouse I ever worked in, and almost never see mentioned anywhere today. The floors. In an old Irish cottage, the floorboards were not simply laid down and left. Underneath them, before the boards went on, raw sheep wool was packed in. Loose, not compressed, just laid in. The farmers did not do this because they read it somewhere. They did it because the cold comes up through the floor as surely as it comes in through the door, and they had wool, and they understood what wool does. I have done this myself in a house I rented for a time years ago. The difference was noticeable, not dramatic, not overnight, but by February, that floor was not the cold thing it had been in November. Your feet tell you things that your thermometer does not. You can still do this. Raw wool, ordered in, costs very little for a standard room. You lift a board at the edge, you pack the wool in loose, not tight, loose, it needs to breathe, and you lay the board back. If your floors are carpeted, the carpet itself helps, but wool underneath does a different job. It holds the cold below the floor rather than letting it rise. The next thing I want to talk about is the walls. In County Clare, old cottages were built with walls 2 feet thick, stone and rubble fill. The thickness itself was the insulation, mass, holding the day's warmth and releasing it slowly through the night. You cannot add 2 feet of stone to your walls. I understand that. But the principle those walls used is still available to you. Those walls were also sealed, regularly, with lime wash. This is not paint. Lime wash is a breathable coating. It allows the wall to release moisture rather than trapping it inside. What that means in practice is that your wall stays dry, and a dry wall holds heat. A damp wall loses it. Your modern paint does the opposite. It seals the surface. Moisture sits behind it. The wall stays cold. Lime wash is still made, still sold. It costs less than paint, and it goes on easily. On an old brick or stone wall, and many of the older homes in this country have them. One coat of lime wash on the interior makes a measurable difference. In my experience, the north-facing rooms are where you feel it most. I want to stop here for a moment and say something plainly. The insulation industry in this country will tell you that the answer to a cold house is a product. Blown-in foam, spray insulation, a new unit. These things are sold to you as the modern solution, the only solution, the solution that requires a professional and a significant check written out. And some of those things have their place. I will not pretend otherwise. But the people in those Irish cottages were not warm because they bought something. They were warm because they understood how heat moves, how it rises, how it escapes, how it can be slowed by the right material in the right place. That understanding costs nothing, and it has been quietly set aside because there is no profit in it. I am not angry about that. It is just the way of things, but you are allowed to know it. There is a thing they called the hearth backdraft, and understanding it will change how you think about your doors. In the old cottages, the main door almost never faced north, and when there was a door on the north side of the house, there was almost always a second internal door, a short passage between them. This was not accident. The people who built those houses had watched the wind for generations. They knew that a door facing the prevailing cold wind, opened and closed through the day, brings more cold air in than almost anything else, and they built accordingly. You cannot move your door, I know that, but you can understand what it is doing. If your front door faces north or northeast and opens directly into your main living space, every time that door opens in winter, you are letting a column of cold air walk straight into the warmest room in the house. A heavy curtain behind the door, what they sometimes called a draft curtain, does what that internal passage did. It gives the cold air somewhere to lose itself before it reaches you. This is not a complicated thing. A thick curtain hung on a rail behind the door, on a rod that clears the door when it opens. That is the whole solution. It cost those cottage people nothing because they had the fabric already. It will cost you very little today. Let me tell you about the attic now, because this is where I see the most waste in the houses I have been inside. The old Irish method for roof insulation was thatch. Reed or straw, layered in overlapping rows, the way roof slates overlap. Each layer shedding water outward, the layers beneath staying dry and still. And thatch, when it is done properly and kept dry, is one of the most effective natural insulators that exists. The air pockets trapped between the layers are what does the work. Small pockets of still air held in place. Your attic insulation works on the same principle. But here's what I see people get wrong. They treat attic insulation as a one-time thing, laid down and forgotten. In an old thatched cottage, the thatch was checked every year. It was topped up. The parts that had settled or thinned were attended to, because insulation that is settled and compressed is no longer trapping air. It is just a layer of flat material doing half the job it should. Go into your attic this month. Look at what is there. If it is compressed, if it is thin in places, if there are gaps around the hatch or the eaves, those gaps are where your heat is going. Loose fill natural material, topped up over what is there, costs very little and makes a significant difference. Do not wait for someone to tell you it needs doing. The people in those cottages did not wait. They checked it themselves, every autumn, before the cold came. The last thing I want to show you is the one that surprises people most. Wattle and daub. In the old buildings, gaps in the stone. Around window frames, where the wall meets the floor, where pipes come through, were sealed with a mix of clay and straw. The mix was breathable, flexible, and effective. It moved slightly with the building as temperatures changed. It did not crack the way hard materials do. The modern equivalent is clay plaster. You can buy it, or you can make a rough version with clay-heavy soil and a little straw. It goes into gaps the way the original did. It breathes. It holds. And in an old house, which moves and settles in ways that rigid fillers do not accommodate, it stays put in a way that silicone or expanding foam sometimes does not. I will tell you plainly, this one takes a little more patience than the others. It is not difficult, but it rewards care. Go slowly around the window frames. Press the material in rather than smoothing it on. Let it dry fully before you paint over it. My grandmother used to say, "The thing that is put in carefully does not need to be put in twice." She was right about that, as she was right about most things. So, this week, start with the door sausages. One afternoon, 3 doors, and the drafts that have been robbing you all winter are stopped. Check your attic hatch. Run your hand around the edges. If you feel cold air, seal it. Weather stripping costs almost nothing, and the hatch is one of the worst heat losses in any house. Look at your north-facing rooms. If you have bare brick or stone walls that feel cold to the touch, lime wash is your answer. 1 coat. Breathable. Inexpensive. Effective. And look at your doors. A heavy curtain behind the front door costs less than 1 month of the extra heating bill that door is causing you right now. That is where to begin. Those 4 things, done this week, will make a difference you can feel before the month is out. The people who built those cottages in County Clare were not engineers. They had no qualifications. What they had was the cold, and the problem, and the knowledge that had been handed down to them about how to answer it. They passed that knowledge on because it worked, and because the people who came after them would need it. Somewhere in the last 60 years, the decision was made that you did not need to know this anymore. That the furnace and the bill and the service call were the answer. She knew otherwise. She always knew. And now so do you. Now I want to ask you something before you go. Tell me in the comments, what is the one thing in your house that costs you money every single month and you have never found a proper answer for? Just one thing. I read every comment, and there is a good chance I already know the fix.